Hi and welcome back. Today I'm doing a replacement for a video that I did about a year ago on Immersive Calibration Pro, and in particular using Immersive Calibration Pro along with Immersive Display Pro, the warping and blending software from Elise-NG, to set up, warp, blend and get a perspective corrected display of 180 degrees on my curved screen setup. This is quite a popular video. It seems like it was quite useful to a few people. People told me in the comments that it had helped them to get Immersive Calibration Pro working, so that's good to hear. But there were a few problems with the video. Not least, it was shot at the wrong resolution, so the PC was running in 4K, but the capture was only 1920 by 1080. I didn't realise that until after I'd finished making the video and put everything back together and actually examined the footage. So everything was kind of grainy and difficult to see. And then just to make it worse, of course, Immersive Calibration Pro itself is not DPI aware. So all of the UI elements became really teeny tiny. And although I guess you get the basic idea from the video, you certainly can't clearly see what's going on. So I have wanted to remake it pretty much since that point, but I thought I needed to wait until there was a reason to do it. And now I have a couple, so I need to redo my screen anyway. And Immersive Calibration Pro version 4 has come out, along with a later version of Immersive Display Pro that has a bunch of new features. And also this time I'm going to calibrate using two cameras, which is something I haven't done before, unlike the one camera calibration I had in the first video. And that should get me a better blend, a better warp, particularly in the corners, where things were going a little bit wrong last time. And so I thought there was enough difference between the situation in the old video and now to merit making a new video, and that's what I'm doing today. Alright, well, let's get the software up and running. So first thing I'm going to do is log into my remote machine. Okay, so here we are inside VNC, and remember I recommend VNC as a remote control tool versus remote desktop. Remote desktop is fine, but you can't run, or rather you couldn't run, P3D inside a remote desktop session, which did cause problems. Now you can, since version 4.5, P3D has supported running in a remote desktop session, but I'm still using VNC because it's a bit more lightweight. And as you can see here, we actually have the two screens. So this is the left projector, this is the right projector. Just zoom back in. Now I'm meant to zoom back in. There we go. And this is the folder with the Immersive Calibration Pro software in. Now, you don't need to install anything. You can just run it from the folder, except you do need to install Bonjour. Now it comes in a folder here, as you can see, and you can just run the MSI 64 if you're on a 64-bit machine, or you can just double-click the install first Bonjour batch file that they provide for you handily. But you must do that, and it does need to be installed. So make sure you've done that before you start, or things will just not work. But assuming you've got it installed, and you know it's benign enough, you can just leave it installed for the next time that you have to use the software. Then you can run everything else straight out of the folder. Also note there are some PDF files here. These are guides to how to use the software. They're reasonably good. A number of people said in my last video that the video helped them more than these did, and they are a little bit kind of dry and procedural, but they're definitely worth referring to, particularly if you're new. So don't be afraid to look at them, just recognize that they can be a little bit confusing. So we'll run the client software here on this machine. I've set it to run as administrator. You can see it actually minimizes itself because I've run it before. So once you run it once, it will start minimizing itself. So let me bring it back. So it shows you the displays attached to the machine. Now you might have more displays than you have projectors. You could have two projectors and a monitor as well, for example. So it doesn't assume that every display is a projector. You have to tell it. It knows how the things are laid out, so it knows this is on the left and this is on the right. All I have to do is right click here, and on the menu I can pick how many projectors are connected to this particular display. There you go. And then one projector 1 times 1 here, and that's marked both the projectors up. And now I can minimize that. And at the moment, that's all you need to do over here. So let's leave that behind. Now over here on the main desktop, we have the same folder. so the Immersive Calibration Pro v401 unzipped folder. And remember that you've got to make sure that the client you're using and the server are exactly the same version. They don't work if they're not the same version. So this is version 4.01, which is the latest at the time of making the video. And I'm going to start server.exe. Takes a little while to start, and then it asks if you want to create a new project or load an existing project file. You can see I have an existing project, but I'm not going to use that. I'm going to create a new file. Also worth noting that at various points in this video I'm going to do picture-in-picture, so you will see a picture from a camera position in front of the screen right now. There you go, you can see that. And at the moment you can see that's just got what you were just seeing on the other machine. So if I just bring that up, so that's basically the display of that, okay? And that will let you see some of what's going on with the camera-based calibration. I'll also insert some footage of how I've got my cameras positioned. I've got them actually taped, literally, with duct tape underneath each projector, and I've got the camera lens in alignment with the projector lens so that the camera has exactly the same view that the projector does, although I did have to move them very slightly to make sure they got the whole of the screen, or rather the half of the screen that they're going to be configuring, into view. So I'll maybe talk about that a bit later and show you some footage on that. But for now, we'll just get rid of this. We don't need that right now. So I'm going to create a new project. Now, you'll see two things. Firstly, you'll notice that the user interface elements now look normal sized. Well, I am still capturing in 4K, and unfortunately FlyElise hasn't decided to make their software DPI aware. So how did I do this? Well, it was actually very simple. I right clicked on here, I went into properties, went into compatibility, and at the bottom of the compatibility page, I also checked to run this program as an administrator because that seems to help. But there is a button for change high DPI settings. If you go in there, you get different options. So you can say, let the program deal with the DPI. Or you can say, use the DPI set for my main display when I signed into Windows, for example. None of that works if the software doesn't actually know anything about DPI. So in this case, I've said override the high DPI scaling behavior. Scaling is performed by the system and enhanced. And what that means is that Windows is scaling the UI instead of relying on the software to do it, because it won't. And that's how I've managed to get normal size UI elements. So things should look a bit better, given I'm also capturing this video in 4K finally. Alright, so here is our initial interface. And basically it's asking three questions. Top one is, how are the projectors arranged? Are they tiled? In other words, are they next to each other, or are they stacked? Which is, do they overlap to any extent? Now, a degree of overlap is fine in tiled mode, and that's what we are going to use. Stacked mode is really intended for something a bit different. Okay, so then we have to tell it what kind of screen shape we need. Now, it's automatically picked cylinder, which is far and away the most common, and it's the one that we want. And then you've got the choice to either map on camera or to map on projector. So mapping on camera if you're going to use cameras, map on projector if you're not going to use any cameras. We are using cameras, so we'll say map on camera. But we'll also be using markers, which is something I didn't do in the last video, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So let's say create that project. That actually runs the main piece of software. So this is the main UI. Let me just maximize that. So you should actually be able to see the UI elements this time, which is good. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save the project. So I'm going to give it a name, and traditionally I just call it by the day's date. So it's the 13th of July, 1307.project. At this point, we need to tell it how our screens are arranged. So we know that it's 2 across by 1 down. One projector, so we say 2 rows by 1. Projector resolution is 1920 by 1080. Obviously, if you had 4K projectors, you could specify those here. I would love to have 2 4K projectors, and one day I might do, but right now they're so expensive. You double click here. It says, okay, these are the remote projectors I can find. So remember, this is coming from the client software that we're running on the other machine, and it's come to us over the network courtesy of Bonjour. And don't forget, you have to install Bonjour on this machine as well, so it's got to be on both machines. If you haven't done that, it won't work. Now I know that projector 1 is the left hand, so I'm going to double click on that and say select, and I'm going to double click here and say projector 1 on the other machine, well, not other machine, other display is the right hand side. Now, picture in picture, you can see we've now got the screen identity on each half of the projection screen, and that will be important later so that we can see what we're doing. Okay, so next step is to go onto the screen itself. Now, you can actually see that I've accidentally picked a horseshoe screen. That's going to be a problem, so bear with me a second while I fix that. Okay, so I've corrected that. That was slightly embarrassing. So here is my cylindrical screen. Now at the moment you can see it's actually broken down into segments 10 across and 10 down. That's not an unreasonable number, but it's quite a lot down. You don't really need that many, at least not at this stage. So we might fix that, but the first thing we've got to do is get all the sizing information correct. Now all the sizing is here. You can put it in directly, but I find it's a lot easier to use the calculator. So I know, for example, that this dimension, the diameter of my screen, is 1.925. That's because it's not entirely regular. And I know that this is 0.865 meters. The actual screen is slightly taller than that, but that is the correct size for the projector image. Excuse me. And I know that this is 0.96 meters. So let me apply that. So it's applied those dimensions, and you can see up here. So there's a couple of things. It's saying that it's actually less than 180 degrees. It's not. It is a true 180 degrees. It's just that the screen is not perfectly regular. So I'm going to, oops. Well, I'm just going to retype this. Minus 90 to plus 90. Everything else looks okay, except I'm going to go from 10 columns and 10 rows to 10 columns and 4 rows. The reason for this is because that's how I've actually got my screen marked up. Now again, looking at picture in picture, you can't see any markers on the screen because I haven't used physical markers. Instead, I did what I thought was clever, and I used an ultraviolet marker pen, the idea being that I could turn on a black light and actually see all of those on the screen. But they wouldn't be there in normal light, and so I could leave them on there, and whenever I needed to do a recalibration they would be there. So I went to great lengths to do that. Unfortunately, as it's transpired, you can actually see the marks on the screen. So I did try a little test in a corner and it looked fine. I couldn't see it at all. But then other areas of the screen, they've shown up, and they've shown up anywhere from very faint to actually quite visible. And clearly it's just a reaction between the whatever the ink is in the ultraviolet pen and the screen goo paint that I'm using. So I think a normal white surface like paper, for example, it wouldn't show up on. But because this is a painted surface with high reflectivity, it would seem that it does actually show up. So lesson learned. I'm going to see how annoying those dots are, whether I actually notice them in everyday use, because if I do, then I'm just going to repaint the screen. So the screen is probably due for a repaint fairly soon anyway, but that will force me to do it. And then next time I do this, I guess I'll probably end up using physical markers or something like that. I've got some video footage of me setting up the marking on the screen, so I'm going to run that for you now, albeit in super fast mode. And you can see how I actually did it with a laser level, and basically positioning the laser level at the right height and then running it across the screen. It's a cross laser level, it's got crossing lines so that each one lined up. And the way I measured it initially was by using, actually went to IKEA recently to get some furniture. IKEA, if you look, I don't know if it's new or not, but they certainly got them. They got these paper rulers. They're 1 meter in length, and they are in both centimeters and inches, and they're just hanging around the place, so you can measure things quickly. But they also have to be perfect for measuring around a curved surface. So I got a pack of them, brought them back with me, and that was what I used to measure around the circumference of the screen. And having found the right points at the top, I could then use the laser line to mark along that line vertically all the way down. And so that's how I did it. And the footage of how I'm doing that is running right now. Okay, so you can see how I did that. Now I'm going to switch to the next step, which is views. And basically you're progressing through these steps. They become available as you've input enough information into the previous step, and you want to get right the way to this when you're going to be exporting your configuration. So now we're in the views page. In the views page, you have to tell the system what's visible to which camera and in which part of the screen. So there are two views here. There's the left-hand side and the right-hand side. So increase the number of views to 2. On view number 1, it's going to be mapped to the screen grid. So that is the grid that I've put on the screen. It could be physical markers, or in my case, it's ultraviolet markers, albeit they've gone slightly wrong. And you have to tell it how many columns of the screen that it's subdivided up into are involved in that view. So we know that it is start at column 1 and go to column 5. So to the halfway point, so the view is half and half. The projector actually overspills beyond that halfway point. That's fine, overlap is fine, but you are going to have to tell it about that. So let's just increase number of rows to 4. So this is view number 1, the bit that's in yellow. Which projectors are in it? Well, projector number 1, which is the one on the left, yes, certainly is. But projector number 2 also leaks into this image. And this is what I missed the first time I tried to do this, and it's the reason it went wrong. You have to tell it that projector 2 is also involved. Okay, so projectors 1 and 2 in this view. And then you select the camera for that view. I happen to know that the right camera is the HD Pro Webcam 920. And I'm going to use the maximum resolution that it supports, even though that's only 2 FPS. That doesn't matter, the software will adjust itself. I've got it upside down, hanging off the bottom of the projector, so I need to mirror in both directions. So I'll say mirror vertical and horizontal. And now it should bring up the image. There you go. And so you can actually see there's the identity image that came up from the client software. You can also just see the other projector in the corner there. Then on to view 2. Same deal. So this time we know that it begins at column number 6, and it's 5 columns wide to cover that part of the screen. So this part of the screen here. And then it's 4 rows deep. So that's view number 2. And again, both projectors are in that view because projector 1 spills over into it slightly. Select the camera, and this time by elimination, it's got to be the other one, C922 Pro Stream. That's just a slightly later version of the same camera. I do recommend using the same webcam, or as close as you can get, if you can, since they have very similar pictures and responses. And again, I'm going to mirror them, and let the image come up. There you go, and you can see, we can see again all of this half of the screen, and there's the other projector. Alright, that's good enough for here. I'm going to save the project at this point, because I don't want to lose any of this. And then we go on to map and scan views. Map and scan views is where you're going to spend the vast majority of your time. Certainly tweaking it to get it right. Okay. There are 4 grids at play in each view. So the first grid is the screen grid, and that's this one. You can see at the moment it's just a regular grid. We have to make this grid conform to the actual shape of the screen in the bit of the view that we need. And then there's the mask grid. Now the mask grid just, well, basically it does what it says on the tin. It masks off areas of the image that we don't want to be considered. The reason for that is that the projector light cone is calculated using patterns being flashed on the screen. And if we have areas in the image that are not masked off, then it might see those and think that the image extends further than it does. So the mask is generally the first thing that I set. Although in this case I'm not going to. I'm actually going to set it after I've set the screen grid, and I'll explain why I do that as we go. Then you've got the 2 projector grids, and those are all about where the light goes. So you can see at the moment it's just a square grid, but the actual light from the projector doesn't fall like that, really. So this will end up in a different shape. It will end up warped to correspond with the light from the projector. Okay, so back to the screen grid. And I'm going to go back to identity on each projector, because that's slightly easier to see. You can use auto map on this, which means if you can get 6 of these points in the right place, it can calculate the rest of it for you. Now I might actually use that, but we're going to use the physical markers that I put on the screen. Now you probably can't see any of them. I can see a couple. I think that there is one of them, and I think that there is one of them. But they're not very visible, unsurprisingly, because they're in ultraviolet marker. Now, if I turn on the ultraviolet light that I have here, and it's quite a big one, it's 50 watt, so it'll work even in the darkness. Well, okay, you can see the ultraviolet light, but you can't really see the markers, and that's because of the light from the projectors. So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to get the projector remote, which I've got over here, and I'm going to say Eco Blank, which will actually turn off the light while leaving the projectors on. There you go. Now you can just about start to see the markers. So here's one, here's one, here's one. But we need to get better than that. So we need to change the camera settings so that it sees them. Okay. Yes, that's better. That's definitely better. Okay, so we'll go with this for now. And this is just while we get these points aligned. So we know that. So if I do Control Z, that brings up the that brings up the zoom display, and then I can move this with the cursor over here, and you can see there it is. Now I happen to know that that's where we need to be for that corner. If I turn on Auto Map, now I can press Control and left click, and that locks that point in place. I'll take the bottom one here, and there you can see the point right there. Lock that one in place, and then bottom right here lines up with this one. You can tell I don't really know what I'm doing yet. This is literally my first time trying to do it with these ultraviolet marks. So there's 4 points. We just need 2 more. Well, this is the midpoint marker here. And as you can see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we need the third one. Which is this one here. What if that is it? So first one, that's the second one, that's this one, that's this one, so that's this one here. This one should go up to here. You notice these points are not entirely aligned with the top and bottom of the screen. That is because the screen itself is actually not completely level. So by using the laser level, I got a completely level set of points, but they're not necessarily right at the edges of the screen. That's fine. I'm happy to sacrifice some small parts of the display in order to get a better image. Alright, so there's 6 points. We can now try the auto map. So you click on auto map perspective down here. It tells you what the divergence is, and 0.1 is the max divergence. That's not bad. It's not bad at all. And basically these points should all pretty much line up with the points that we've set. So let's see if they do. Okay, that's a little bit below. 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 However, I happen to know, because I've been back and done the measuring, that actually those points are a little bit off. So that's okay. That's okay. We'll leave it where it is. This one here. Yeah, so there's the point. There it is again. It's off by about the same amount. Okay. So I want to move this a little bit. I want to move this a little bit. That's good. That's good. That's good. And again, you can see the points here. That's a bit dark. There's the point there. Takes a little bit of eye training to get used to this. That one's okay. That one's okay. That one's okay. And then here, yeah, that one's fine. As is that one. So go across a little bit. That one's alright. And that one's alright. Okay, so let's set all these. Just set the ones around the edges and we'll recalibrate again. So we're down to just a tiny divergence in one dimension. So let's have a look and see if we can see where that is. Well, this one looks to be very slightly off. So that lines up, but is a little bit low. That lines up. That could do with being moved. Let's just set those. That's okay. So yeah, it was very frustrating that after having spent all the time doing those ultraviolet markers, I then realised that I'd made a couple of measuring mistakes and actually made... So I got marks down the side of the screen for each of, that are supposed to be at 25%, but actually the first one was smaller than the others and the last one was bigger than the others, so they're ever so slightly off, and that's fine. That's why I'm okay with the fact that this is a few pixels down too low. But I'm just going to adjust them until I'm happy with them. Yeah, that's good. That's good. On this sort of shadowy side of the screen, you can barely see the points. But this looks pretty even, right? I think that would be fair to say. Let's auto map it. Yeah, so we've got a tiny little divergence from the ideal shape. I can't quite see where it is. Let's just try that again. What's it saying? Yeah, it's saying max 2.6 pixels. That's fine. That's more than fine. Okay. So there's the screen grid done on the left-hand side. Now I'm just going to return that camera to its default settings. So that's the left-hand side screen grid done. Now I can do the mask grid. And I do that, I'm going to turn it, switch horizontal points down here. From 3 to 2, vertical points 3 to 2, so you notice the points disappear here. So I've just got basically a rectangle I can drag around, so I'm just going to drag these corners. I'm going to Control Z it. And I'm literally going to drag these until they line up with the corners of the screen. And that's the mask. Now we need to make it conform perfectly to the shape, so to increase the number of horizontal points by adding a third one. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring this up till it intersects with this line. Now you see it's not perfect, that's fine, we're going to add more control points. Same for this one, bring that down. And we're going to add 2 more control points. This should be enough. So make that line up, make that line up, make that line up, and you see the curve now follows the line. Okay, so the mask grid is now in place. Now I'm going to save. Quite lucky we haven't had a crash so far. And so that is the left-hand screen with the screen grid and masked off. Now, I need to do the same on the other side, but there's no point in you sitting and watching it because it's basically the same thing over and over again, and you just adjust until you're happy. So let's just move on and let's do some pattern recognition on this screen to try and recognize the projector grids. And once we've done that, I'll go away and do the other half, and then we can pick up again at the edge blending stage. But in order to recognize where the projector light falls, you need to do projector recognition. To do that, we switch to projector 1. There you go. So you see these circles. What we need to do is to get these circles recognized across the screen. That all happens down here. So we've got camera scanning turned on. You've got to make sure that's on. There's some camera settings here, but I leave those as they are. And the controls down here are basically, so you've got configure visible circles. So you could, for example, turn off all the circles that are not visible. If you've got little edges where it might get a bit confused because it's kind of half and half, like here, it's not going to recognise these because they're not full circle. So you could just turn them off. But there's no real need to, I found. It does tend to work anyway. So let's say recognise projector circles. At this point we'll go picture in picture. So if you actually look at the screen here on the left hand side of your image, watch what it does. There you go. Okay, so by flashing some patterns on the screen, it was able to recognise what it could and couldn't see. And then here, if we look on back in the user interface, each of these circles that's surrounded by a green line is one that it's recognised. Each of the dots surrounded by green is one that it's recognised. So it hasn't seen these. It picks them up here. Hasn't seen some of these, but you know, it's got a good general idea of the shape. Now, if that wasn't quite good enough, you can adjust the circle size and the circle distance, for example. So why don't we increase the circle size a little bit? If we go to 1.10 and then we increase the distance a little bit, and we recognise those, it'll probably still recognise just as many. There you go, it's recognised them all. But it's still not picking those up. So if you wanted to fill in those areas, you would have to reduce the circle size a little bit. So I'm actually quite happy with the default. Sometimes in the past I've had to switch to pure black and white. So you turn the switch here, black and white threshold, and it just recognises black and white. Doesn't really matter at this point. The positioning of the camera where the projector is means that you're seeing the light cone in the most directly pure form you can, which is why this grid mostly appears to be straight and not curved in any way. It's all about the camera's point of view, which makes it a lot easier for it to recognise. So let's just say recognise projector circles again. There you go. But let's not forget the projector 2 is also involved in this display. So if I switch to projector 2, you can see just this little edge is here, but we still need to deal with that. We still need to recognise it. So let's recognise those projector circles. Now, this is a case where actually adjusting the size might help a little bit. But don't forget, if you adjust the size, you're adjusting it for the whole of the projector, including the other part of the display. But if I were, for example, to increase the circle distance, what I'd be trying to do basically is get full circles here. So you can do that, but you have to reduce the circle size. So let's say I do that, and then I recognise the projector circles. Now it should see them right up to the edge, and that could be quite useful in terms of blending. There you go. So it's recognised all of those. So projector 1, projector 2. Circles are recognised. After you've recognised them to test, then you map them. This button here, scan projector circles, and does that. Again, picture in picture, you can see what it's doing. Immersive Calibration Pro 401, by the way, has a faster scanning algorithm, so that used to take quite a lot longer than it currently does. And you can see it's picked up most of the circles. The ones in red are the ones that it's not seeing, but that should be more than enough for it to get the shape. And let's do that for projector 2 as well. This is taking a bit longer, but it's recognised pretty much all of those circles. So the red ones, again, here are the ones that are not recognised as being part of this view. So it's just the green ones, which is exactly what we want. Okay. Now I need to go away and do that for view 2. No need for you to sit around and wait while I do that, so I'll be back with you in a moment. Okay, so I've mapped the second half of the screen. So I've mapped view 2. As you can see, I've just finished mapping the other projector into view 2. And similarly, I've got most of the projector circles recognized and mapped. Now all I need to do is map the whole thing. Okay, so let's just do a rescan this time. All right, let's do a full recalculate. Okay, well that worked this time, and as you can see we've got the test pattern on the screen. If you look picture in picture, you can see it doesn't look too bad initially, but we'll have a closer look in a minute. But what it shows us is that there's a lot of factors that affect whether or not you can get a successful camera setup, and the camera settings have a lot to do with that. It advises you to basically set everything to default, turn off all the auto options, but you do have to tweak the camera sometimes in order to get the circles better recognized, and really it's a battle about that, because the more detail you have and the more recognized circles you have, the better the blend you're likely to get. So I'm just going to take a quick physical look at the screen, which you can see, but at the moment I'm turned away from, so just bear with me one moment. Okay, so we can see a couple of things. One is that there is some distortion in the middle at the bottom, where one set of lines has gone completely wonky, and that's roughly in the middle, so that's got something to do with the missing circles in the middle. So we're going to need to improve that. You can also see that whilst the image is lining up at the top, it isn't quite lining up in the middle. There's basically what looks like a little bit of a hump. And again, that has to do with the recognition of the circles at the edges. So we're going to need to improve that a little bit, which means having another go at it. So I go back to view number 1. And I'm just going to put the identity back on the projectors. There we go. I'm going to go to projector 1. So part of the problem, I think, is going to be these partial circles. How do we fix that? Well, so you can reduce the circle size. That size there. Let's just recognize the circles in that image. Okay, so it does seem, it sees most of them. It's not seeing these here, but then it wouldn't do, but it is seeing the circles. Let's look at projector 2 in that image, and we'll recognize the circles there. So recognizing kind of gives you the immediate does it see them. Mapping them actually collects the data that you need. So, okay, here we've got a bunch of circles that aren't being recognized, and that's probably part of the problem. So we need to get these circles on the frame. How do we do that? Well, there's a couple of ways, but the easiest is going to be to reduce the circle size. Now all those circles are on the frame, let's recognize them. Okay. Then let's look at view number 2. Now view number 2 is where the actual distortion was. Part of that I think you can see is here, look. That is not how the projectile light cone should be, so there's something going wrong around about here. So let's look at projector number 1. So here it's not picking up a smooth line, and I don't quite know why. So let's try again, reducing the circle size a little bit. And let's try recognizing the circles. Okay, so it sees those circles. Let's look at projector number 2. Again, hopefully it'll map those okay. So that looks like it should be okay to me, but let's try and recalculate it. No, that clearly hasn't worked. Yes, right. That can happen, don't worry. What we're going to need to do is we're going to need to remap all the projectors again. So let's go back to view 1, projector number 1, and we'll map it. They call it scanning. I think they used to call it mapping originally, but they call it scanning now. If I could get... Yeah, see, here is potentially an issue. It shouldn't be a big issue, but it is potentially an issue. Look at projector 2 in that display and we'll map that one. Like I said, map and scan views is where you're going to spend most of your time because you've got to get this right, or else you're never going to get a decent blend. Right, let's go to view 2. View 2 is where we've got some of the problems. Let's go to projector number 1 and let's map that. That looks like it should be okay to me. So projector number 2 and let's map that. And again, I think that should be okay. I'm just going to save. Now I'm going to calculate, see what we've got. Okay, so now we're back to something approximating what we want. But again, and we've got rid of that sort of lump, that weird bit at the bottom, but we haven't quite got rid of the lump. And to be fair, that's not the easiest thing in the world to do with the circles. Now it all depends on exactly how good you want your warp to. If you're okay to put it with a few little problems with it, then this will probably be okay. But it's not good enough from my perspective, and in particular, it doesn't work that well in the middle. So there are a few ways that you can fiddle with this. One of them is that you can move the screen points around and try and affect the mapping that way. The other is that you can do post warping. So the way to correct these kinds of problems, I think, is probably post warping, but let's try doing it with the screen grid. So I think this is a case for post warping, and post warping is something I didn't show you in the last video, so this is a useful piece of new information. So if you go to the workflow menu, there are these extra steps beyond the export, etc., that you can use, and one of those is post warp. And in this case, we want to post warp on projector 1. So it gives you a warped image. So this is the equivalent warped image on a flat surface, and it gives you a grid 5x5. Well, that's not really what we want. So I'm going to make it a much tighter grid, 20x20. This doesn't affect any of the other grids, by the way. And then what you do is you pick the right place on the screen and you start dragging stuff around to just adjust the warp a little bit. And you can see here is where the little hump is. So really what I want to do is to move this around and move some of these. I might make it even tighter grid, 40x40. And I can post warp some of this stuff. So when you're doing this, you've really got to look at the screen and see how it's actually affecting it. So I'm going to do that, which means I'll turn away from the microphone. So you're not going to hear me quite as well, but give me a moment. If I select that, I can then see on the screen which one is selected. I'm going to turn around. I've got the keyboard in my hands. If we have a look at so if we go full screen on the video camera image, you see that grid is projected onto the screen, but obviously in a warped fashion. So I can use the same keys to move this around. So let's say, well, if I drag this, you can see that it goes out of and you're going to have to do the warp on both projectors in order to line it up. I'm dragging all these points down since it appears to be a problem all the way down to the bottom of the screen. The trouble with post-warping is even a couple of pixels here or there can really affect things a lot, and so you got to be careful because the eye is very good at picking up artifacts of any kind of artifacts in the motion. So when things are moving around the screen, you'll definitely notice if they're off. That might help. Now let's switch to the other projector. So workflow post warp projector 2, and we're going to do the same thing here. 40 by 40 grid. There we go. Now I need to adjust here a little bit as well, so let's have a look. Okay, so I've done a little bit of tweaking with the post warp, and I'm reasonably happy with what I've got. Let's just get the picture-in-picture going again so you can see what I'm talking about. There we go. So things are a little bit smoother in the middle. And I've done that by moving a few pixels around, but it's not perfect. And I'll be honest, when you've got objects moving across that space, you will see a little bit of distortion. The thing is, if you're focused on the flight simulation, you probably won't know or care. And that's the real thing, is that you could spend days and possibly weeks trying to get your display absolutely pixel perfect. And I dare say if you had a slightly better projection screen, one that was professionally made and absolutely conformed to the right shape to within very high tolerances, maybe you would get a slightly better warp than I have. Also, if you had your projectors in a slightly better position than I've got mine. But given the limitations of the system, this is pretty good. I'm not going to turn my nose up at it, and I don't think you guys should either. So that's the map scan and tweak process done. I'm just going to save the project again. Now we get to edge blending. Now the edge blending has already been done by default, and as you can see on the picture-in-picture, everything does blend quite nicely in the middle. So this is the default blend profile, and this is really designed to make everything blend nicely. What I am noticing, if I'm looking at the picture manually, is there is a slightly bright spot in the middle, and that's probably to be expected because where the projectors overlap you get more brightness, and the edge blending is designed to try and deal with that, but it's not always perfect. So there are things that here you can play with. So if we keep looking at the picture-in-picture for now, let's say I turn the gain down to 0. There you can see an actual strip has appeared in the middle, where the two images are blending together. So we need at least some gain, but we don't necessarily need quite that much. So if I get to 0.5, which is the default, That's all right. If we go over with the gain, you can see what happens. We get a bright, very bright band in the middle. So gain of about 0.5 is about right. And I'm just going to set that manually. The slope is something you can play with. So the slope determines how sharp the transition is. So in other words, roughly how wide the blend zone is in the middle. If I reduce the slope to nothing, you can see just the blended area there. Right? And that is basically the overlap between the two projectors. If I increase the slope significantly, well, it's fine, but the blend area is now very large. And that actually might be fine for what you want. I'm going to set back to default, which is 1.22. And then you've got the gamma, which is all about the gain. So if I turn that up, things get a bit brighter in the middle. And if I turn it down, then eventually things will disappear. Okay, so there's a threshold here. If I keep increasing that, you can see that the bit in the middle gradually appears. And you can fiddle with this to try and get a nice even brightness. So those things you can play with, but to be honest with you, I tend to leave it as the default, because that's usually pretty good. Okay, next step is color correction. Color correction is a relatively recent one, so I think they added it only in version 4. And you can manually adjust the colors on the screen in different areas if you're having problems with particular colors matching. I have no issues with color, so I'm not going to bother with color correction. Next step is perspective, and this is where you calculate your perspective view, in this case my 180-degree view. So first thing you need to do is to find the frustums. There you go, it's found some frustums. So first thing I need to do is turn on asymmetric frustums, because I'm going to need that. So my screen is built high up, so the bottom of the screen is not at floor level. The bottom of the screen is quite near to my eye point. And in fact my eye point is not in the middle of the screen, my eye point is quite a bit lower down, it's somewhere down here. And so I need to adjust the frustums to allow for my eye point. Here's the eye point adjustment. This is X, Y, and Z. So we need to bring the Y down, which is the height. So let's just move this. Try and move it where you can really see what you're doing, but actually this will do. Let's try 1.5 to begin with. Means my eye point's about here. Might be about right. Might be more like 1.6, I think. There we go. You can see a black strip here because the view has obviously moved. And then if I over here select tunnel, so it's actually showing here and also on the displays a view on a tunnel. And if I look at my display, and you can see that that's currently centered. If I hit calculate perspective to change it for what I've asked, now it's moved down, but there is this blank space at the top, and that's because the frustums are in the wrong place. So now we're going to move the view frustums themselves, and to do that you move not the left and right, they're fine, but the top and the bottom. So top, just move it up like this until basically this lines up with the corner. So 44 is good. And then this we reduce until it kind of lines up there, right? Remember that 44.5 minus 26.5. Let's go to projector 2. Now it's not always perfectly the same. So that's 45.5 and that's 46.5. Let's just move it around. Yeah, so this one's going to be 46.5 and minus 25.5. Let's recalculate the perspective. And now if we look at the camera picture, you can see that we've got the areas at the top of the picture back again. So from your view there, that looks pretty warped, right, and bent, and that's fine. But if you were sitting where you should be, right in front of the screen, inside the curve, you would see that as a completely straight set of lines and straight view forward. And where that sort of where the back of the tunnel is there, that's where your eye pointer is expected to be. It's just still a little bit too high, so I'm just gonna go down to minus 0.18. If I'm gonna go down to minus 2. And I'm going to adjust the frustums again. Bit fiddly this, but once you get it there, you're fine. So get that perspective again. Yeah, and that looks about right to me. That's yeah, that's, you got to eyeball it, but that looks about right. Okay, so there's the perspective correction done. Having done all of that, we can now export all those settings. So go to the export screen. So it asks you what kind of things you want to export. So ProCalib, Warp and Blend. These are the ProCalib files that you use for Immersive Display Pro. So you need that. Then there's other things. So P3D FSX, X-Plane, DCS, and various other kinds of settings. So, you know, barcode warpbox if you're using barcode projection hardware. So let's say P3D FSX, and on the right hand panel we have to decide what we're putting out. So because I'm using prepared 4.4, I'm going to say prepared 3.3 plus view groups, which is what I want, rather than FXML or flight. So these will define the actual camera views that will be used in the simulator to give you the basic perspective, and then the warp will be added on top of that in order to shape it around the curve of the screen. So if you were using FSX, you'd have to use a .flt file, because that is the saved flight file, which includes the camera data. And if you were using earlier versions of prepared, you'd use .fxml, which is an XML version of the FLT files that again saves the scenario but also the cameras. But from prepared 3.3 onwards, we've had this view groups mechanism, which lets you define cameras independent of the scenario, and that's what we want to do. We don't need anything else, we just need the ProCalib files and the view groups files. So let's export that data. And that's done. And now we can actually close Immersive Calibration Pro. And I can close my file guard as well. All the files that you just exported by default will be in a folder called Export. And they're in separate folders here. So here are the ProCalib files. And those have all been generated today, so they're good. And here is the P3D file. So let's just copy both of these. I'm going to copy them over to Sim2. And I've got a temp folder I can stick them in temporarily. Over to VNC. So now we can actually stop the client. There you go. And if I go to C temp, right, first thing I'll do is I'll go into P3D folder and I'll get the view groups XML file. I'm going to edit that in Notepad. So you can see the format, it's just XML. The bit that you need is here, view group down to /view group. Let's copy that. Then, and leave that Notepad open and leave the file open. Go into see program data. If that's not visible, by the way, you need to go into view and check view hidden items so you can see it, and then find the Lockheed Martin folder. But there's program data, not program files. Get that right. Program data, Lockheed Martin, prepared 3D version 4, and down at the bottom here there will be a viewgroups.xml file. Edit that. Don't get them mixed up. Right? Now, before you do anything else, take note. So in here, I've got 2 projectors and I've got 2 display IDs. So projector 1 is display ID 11, projector 2 is display ID 10. That's important. Now I'm going to paste over the top of this what I just cut from the other notepad. There you go. And that's fine, except now it says display ID 1 and 2. Well, that's incorrect, so we've got to change that to 11 and 10. Now, it's not really within the boundaries of this video to teach you about view group setup if you don't know, but I did do a video about setting up multi-channel in Prepared, which does cover the view group stuff in some detail. So have a look at that if you want to know a bit more about view groups. There's also some great tutorials to be found online. Almost Aviation has a fantastic view group tutorial, which I definitely recommend you go and look at. And I'll probably put a link to that in the description below. But now we have the data in the view group file. So let me save that. That's step 1. Step 2. If we go back to my temp folder. Whoops, no, temp folder. And into the ProCalib folder that I exported across. So we're going to need all of these. Let's grab these. Now you need to know where you're keeping your warp and blend data. By default, it'll be in a folder called warp 000, which is where I've got it. And I'm just going to create a new folder called 1307. And I'm going to put all these Calib files in there. Okay, close that. Now if I show Immersive Display Pro, which has been running all this time, this is using the previous calibration files. So in order to set up which calibration it's going to use, you right click on the projector, you say external calibration, and then you navigate to the right one. So warp 000, 1307, and you want the multi-file, because this is for window warping rather than desktop warping. If you don't know the difference between those, you need to know more about Immersive Display Pro than you currently do. So once you understand the difference between those, you'll now understand why it is we want to use the multi-file for the window warping. The single file would be used for desktop warping, and I believe you can do both simultaneously, but I just don't do desktop warping, so I'm not going to bother with those. So you want, this is the left-hand display, so you want the one that originates at 00, goes to 1920 by 1080, so that's this one. Yeah, it's making a good point there. In fact, I'll do what it says. So yeah, I'll do what it says. Let's go into here and let's copy all of these into the config folder. Now, as you see, there's already a bunch of these, so I'm going to get rid of all of these. I think it'll let me do that. Yes, it will. There you go. And let's try that again. So go into config, and I want, yeah, multi 001920. Okay. This one here, I want 1920 0. And that's now set up the two ProCalib files for each display. And then we'll just save that. Now I can try turning on desktop warping and see what happens. So let's do that. You won't see any difference here on that screen, but looking at the camera, so you can see I have warped the desktop, but I haven't warped it properly. And that's because the desktop warp and the window warp are two completely different things. And it's currently using the multi-file. So this is what I said about not necessarily being able to use the two of them together. I'm not sure that whether you can or not. If we go to the single, and we go to the single here, and we save that, now you can see the desktop's actually warped pretty normally. Yeah, and if I drag this window around, but what you will notice is that the overlap is not catered for. So if you're setting up your solution for desktop warping, which you might want to do, you've got to do it slightly differently. But because I'm always only using window warping, I only care about the multi-calib files. So let's just pick the right ones again. I'm sure there's a way to make them both work together, but I don't know what it is, and to be honest with you, I'm not bothered because I don't use them. We'll save like that, and then we'll hide. Okay, so finally, just to prove it all works, let's fire up Prepared. Okay, so here we are in the sim, and looking at the main camera view, you can see that Immersive Display Pro has done its stuff. So the view is nice and warped. If I shift the eye point a little bit, There you go. So sitting here at this point, it all looks really quite bent and warped. Like the lines at the top there look very curved, and you've got kind of what looks like a fisheye perspective when I move this stuff around. But when you go and sit in the position, in the center position where the pilot would be sitting, everything looks miraculously undistorted. And you can see straight out to the left and straight out to the right, and all is good. So there you go. There's your calibrated view. I'm not going to go any further in terms of a demo there, but that's really all you need to do to get it working. And hopefully this video has been useful, since the previous one was. That also shows you how to calibrate with multiple cameras, which is not something we've done before, and how to calibrate with physical markers on the screen, albeit that didn't work out perfectly. Also showed off some of the new features of Immersive Calibration Pro 4, a slightly better user interface, some extra bits and pieces, color correction, etc. Showed you the post-warping, which I hadn't showed you before. With all of that put together, that should give most people the tools they need to get a decently warped and blended display with the 180-degree perspective, or 220, or whatever your screen is, using Immersive Calibration Pro with Immersive Display Pro at version 4.01. And just for extra bonus, we didn't have a single crash at any point during this video, so I'm pretty happy about that. Anyway, if you like the video, hit the like button. I know it's a long one. I'm going to try and edit it down a little bit so it's not as long as it's taken me to make it, which has got to be a good couple of hours. If you want to know when I publish more videos, hit the subscribe button, and you can hit the little bell icon, and you'll get an alert whenever I publish a new video. Has been a little while since the last one. I've been away out the country for work a lot, so I've not been able to make videos. I apologise for that, but I'm afraid it does happen with my job. But I'm back now, and hopefully I'm back for a while, so I should be able to make a bit more content now. I've got the screen recalibrated and I can get flying. I'm intending to make some videos here in the Coronado TBM 850, which should be going up on the channel very soon. So in the meantime, thank you for sticking with me through this very long video. I hope it's been useful to you, and if you have any comments, please leave them in the comments below, good or bad. I like all feedback, and tell me anything you'd like me to change or do differently, or just things you want more of, and I will try to oblige. Thank you very much, and see you next time.